My name is Myrtle, 64 years old and recently widowed after 40 years of marriage to my Frank. When he passed, my daughter Lizzie insisted I move in with her family instead of living alone in our old house. Little did I know that beneath her loving invitation was her husband's resentment at having an extra mouth to feed. The pain of hearing those words from someone I thought was family cut deeper than any knife could. Truki to chiaseko trien ve ketoi lut ngukten te, haichatoi beat bang dang sam tu do vanyan like, no bang kum tung bi doi su te back boy chin ngui tun kumin. Frank and I built a beautiful life together in Atlanta over 4 decades. We met at a community dance when I was just 22, and he was 26, a handsome engineer with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He proposed 6 months later, and we were married in a small ceremony surrounded by our closest friends and family. Frank worked for a prestigious engineering firm specializing in commercial buildings, while I taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. Our early years were filled with the usual struggles of a young couple finding their footing. We saved diligently for a down payment on our modest ranch-style home in a nice suburb. I still remember the day we got the keys, how Frank carried me over the threshold, both of us laughing until our sides hurt. Those walls would hold so many memories over the years. We were blessed with 3 children over the span of 7 years. Our son Michael came first, followed by Robert 2 years later, and finally, our daughter Elizabeth, who we always called Lizzie, 5 years after that. While I loved all my children equally, there was always something special about my relationship with Lizzie. Perhaps it was because she was my only daughter, or maybe it was her sweet, sensitive nature that mirrored my own. Whatever the reason, we shared a bond that felt different from what I had with my boys. By the time Lizzie was in middle school, both boys had become independent and somewhat distant, focused on sports and their friends. But Lizzie and I remained close, spending weekends baking together or shopping at the mall. I was her confidant through her first heartbreak, her cheerleader when she decided to pursue marketing in college, and her shoulder to cry on when things got tough. When I turned 50, my mother's health began to decline rapidly. After much discussion with Frank, I made the difficult decision to take early retirement from teaching to care for her full-time. Though it meant adjusting our finances, Frank supported me completely. My mother lived with us for 3 years before she passed peacefully in her sleep. Those years were challenging but precious, allowing me to repay the woman who had sacrificed so much for me. By then, Michael had moved to California for a tech job, and Robert was in the military stationed overseas. Lizzie had settled in the same city as us after college, working her way up in a marketing firm where she met Marcus, a charismatic real estate broker with ambitious dreams and a flashy smile. The first time Lizzie brought Marcus home, I had mixed feelings. He was polite and charming, bringing an expensive bottle of wine and complimenting my cooking effusively. But something about him felt performative, as though he was putting on a show. Frank, always more trusting than me, thought he was a fine young man with a good head on his shoulders. I kept my reservations to myself, not wanting to dampen Lizzie's obvious happiness. They dated for 2 years before Marcus proposed with a diamond ring so large it looked uncomfortable on my daughter's slender finger. The wedding was lavish, more elaborate than anything our family had ever done. Marcus insisted on paying for most of it himself, though I later learned he had financed much of it through credit cards. Still, the day was beautiful, and Lizzie looked radiant in her designer gown. Life settled into a new normal. Frank and I enjoyed our retirement, traveling occasionally and spending time with friends. Lizzie and Marcus bought a condo in a luxury building downtown, and we visited them for dinner every few weeks. Then Lizzie announced she was pregnant, and our joy knew no bounds. Little Amanda was born healthy and perfect, with Lizzie's blue eyes and Marcus's dark hair. Just after Amanda's 4th birthday, Frank began experiencing persistent back pain. Thinking it was just age catching up with him, he ignored it for months, until I finally insisted he see a doctor. The diagnosis shattered our world: stage 4 pancreatic cancer that had already spread to his liver. The prognosis was grim: 12 to 18 months with treatment. Frank faced his illness with the same quiet strength that had characterized his entire life. He underwent chemotherapy that left him weak and nauseated, but he never complained. Instead, he became focused on putting our affairs in order. He met with our financial advisor multiple times, updated his will, and spent long hours in his study reviewing documents. What I didn't fully understand then was that Frank had been a much savvier investor than I had realized. While we lived modestly, he had consistently invested a portion of his income in stocks, bonds, and real estate over the decades. He explained some of it to me, but honestly, I was too overwhelmed with his care and my grief to absorb all the details. Frank held on for 23 months, defying the doctor's estimates through sheer determination. In his final weeks, when hospice care had been arranged in our home, he made me promise 2 things. First, that I would take care of myself and not just fade away in grief, and second, that I would be smart about the financial cushion he was leaving me. The second promise confused me a bit at the time, but I agreed readily to both. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, casseroles, and condolences. Michael flew in from California, and Robert got emergency leave from his deployment. Lizzie was my rock through those days, staying at the house and handling the details I couldn't face. But all too soon, the boys had to return to their lives, and I was left alone in a house that suddenly seemed too big, too quiet, and filled with ghosts of happier times. It was during the reading of Frank's will that I learned the full extent of his financial planning. Besides our home, which was fully paid off, and the life insurance policy I'd known about, there were investment accounts, retirement funds, and partial ownership in a small commercial property. All told, I was far more financially secure than I had ever imagined. The lawyer explained everything carefully, but all I could think about was how I would trade every penny just to have Frank back. As the weeks passed, the reality of my solitude began to weigh on me. The silence in the house became oppressive. I would catch myself talking out loud to Frank, only to be met with the crushing realization that he would never answer again. I tried to stay busy volunteering at the library and joining a widow's support group, but the evenings were long and lonely. That's when Lizzie started suggesting I sell the house and move in with her family. At first, I dismissed the idea, not wanting to impose, but she was persistent, insisting that Amanda would love having her grandmother around and that it made no sense for me to rattle around in a big house by myself. After 3 months of gentle pressure, I finally agreed to consider it. Looking back now, I wonder if I would have made the same decision had I known what was to come. But grief has a way of clouding judgment and making us vulnerable in ways we can't anticipate. After Frank's funeral and the reading of his will, I spent several months trying to adjust to life alone. Our home of 35 years suddenly felt cavernous and empty. I'd find myself wandering from room to room, touching his things, sitting in his chair, and sometimes wearing his old cardigan just to feel close to him again. Every Sunday, Lizzie would bring Marcus and little Amanda over for dinner. I'd spend the day cooking Frank's favorite recipes, finding comfort in the familiar routines. During one of these visits, as I was washing dishes and Lizzie was drying, she broached the subject again. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, carefully arranging plates in the cabinet. "You shouldn't be alone in this big house. Why don't you sell it and come live with us? We have that spare bedroom that's just collecting dust." "Oh, honey, I couldn't impose like that," I replied, scrubbing a pot with perhaps more vigor than necessary. "You have your own family to worry about." "It's not an imposition, it's what family does," she insisted. "Marcus agrees. We talked about it last night, and he thinks it's a great idea, too." I hesitated, thinking of the real estate agent's card Frank's lawyer had given me months ago. I had considered selling, but couldn't bring myself to take that step yet. "Amanda would love having her grandma around all the time," Lizzie added, playing her trump card. "And honestly, Mom, I worry about you here all alone." And that was the argument that finally wore me down. The thought of being a regular presence in my granddaughter's life was tempting. After a few more weeks of gentle but persistent persuasion, I agreed to list the house. To my surprise, it sold within 10 days for well above asking price. The real estate market in our area had boomed, and our well-maintained ranch-style home in an established neighborhood attracted multiple offers. The proceeds from the sale, combined with what Frank had left me, meant I had a very substantial sum sitting in my bank account. I didn't share the exact amount with Lizzie or Marcus. Something in Frank's final conversations with me about being smart with the money made me cautious. I simply told them the house had sold well and I would be comfortable. Moving day was emotional. Each item I packed represented a memory, a piece of the life Frank and I had built. I decided to keep only what would fit in the spare bedroom at Lizzie's, placing the rest in storage. My wedding china, Frank's collection of model trains, our living room furniture, all went into a storage unit that I paid for a year in advance. Lizzie and Marcus's apartment was in a beautiful modern building in one of the most desirable areas of the city. The Westwood Heights complex had 20 stories of luxury units, a rooftop pool fitness center, and a doorman in the lobby. Their 3-bedroom unit was on the 12th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. It was sleek and contemporary, all granite and stainless steel, a far cry from my cozy, somewhat cluttered home. Marcus greeted me warmly on moving day, insisting on carrying my heavier bags despite the building having elevators. "Welcome to your new home, Myrtle," he said, giving me a quick hug. "We're so happy to have you with us." The spare bedroom had been freshly painted a soft blue and furnished with a new queen-sized bed and dresser. We wanted you to have a comfortable space, Lizzie explained, showing me the attached bathroom that would be exclusively mine. Amanda, now 6 years old, was ecstatic about my arrival. She had made a colorful welcome sign that hung on the bedroom door, and she bounced around me like an excited puppy. Grandma, Grandma, now you can read me stories every night and we can bake cookies whenever we want. Those first few weeks were pleasant. I fell into a routine of taking Amanda to school in the mornings, while Lizzie and Marcus went to work. I'd spend the day exploring the neighborhood shopping for groceries or reading in the small park nearby. In the afternoons, I'd pick Amanda up from school, help her with homework, and start dinner preparation. Marcus would arrive home around 6, usually with a quick greeting before disappearing into his home office to wrap up some things. Lizzie typically came home later, often after 7, looking tired but brightening when she saw Amanda and me. I made sure to cook meals I knew they enjoyed, keep my belongings contained to my bedroom, and offer to pay for groceries. Lizzie initially refused my offers of financial contribution, insisting that having me help with Amanda was more than enough. But I noticed Marcus's expression tighten slightly whenever money was mentioned. About a month into my stay, the first signs of tension appeared. One evening, as I was preparing a roast chicken with all the trimmings, Marcus came into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Wow, we're really going through food quickly these days. He remarked, his tone casual but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. I'm happy to contribute to the grocery bill, I offered again. It's only fair since there's another mouth to feed now. He closed the refrigerator and leaned against the counter. No, that's not necessary. It's just an observation. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Might need to adjust the budget a bit, that's all. A few days later, I overheard him on the phone in his office, the door slightly ajar. Yeah, it's going fine, just different, you know. The place feels smaller suddenly, and man, the water bill is going to be insane this month. I began to feel self-conscious about my presence. I started taking shorter showers and being more mindful about electricity usage. I made sure to clean up any mess immediately and kept my toiletries neatly arranged in the bathroom cabinet. Lizzie seemed oblivious to any tension, but I noticed she was staying at work later and later. When I asked if everything was okay, she assured me she was just busy with a new marketing campaign. One evening, when Lizzie was working late, I was reading in my room with the door partially open when I overheard Marcus talking to someone on his cell phone in the living room. It's just not what I expected, having an extra person here all the time, he was saying in a low voice. I mean, she's Lizzie's mom and all, but I didn't sign up to support an extra mouth to feed indefinitely. The woman's not exactly a joy to have around, either, always hovering and rearranging things. My chest tightened as if squeezed by an invisible hand. Extra mouth to feed. Not a joy to have around. I had been so careful to be helpful and unobtrusive. The unfairness of his assessment stung deeply. I quietly closed my door, not wanting to hear more. That night, I lay awake for hours replaying his words and wondering if coming here had been a terrible mistake. The apartment suddenly felt not like a home, but like a space I was intruding upon. The next morning, I was extra careful to make myself scarce taking Amanda to school and then spending most of the day at the local library. When I returned to prepare dinner, I made a simple meal, conscious now of every ingredient I used. Gradually, I began to notice other changes. Marcus started creating what seemed like arbitrary rules. Let's try to keep the TV volume lower after 8, or I really need the kitchen counter completely clear for my morning coffee routine. Small things, but each one felt like another boundary being erected around me. Lizzie, when she was home, seemed torn between her husband and her mother. Sometimes she would gently counter him, "Mom's not being loud, Marcus," but more often she stayed silent or acquiesced. Maybe we could all be a bit more mindful of noise levels. I tried to speak with her privately, asking if my presence was becoming a burden, but she would rush to assure me that everything was fine, just some adjustment period stress. Yet I could see in her eyes a conflict she wasn't acknowledging. Meanwhile, Amanda remained my joy and comfort. She loved having me take her to school and pick her up, and our afternoons together were filled with homework, crafts, and baking. She would chatter about her friends and teachers, and for those few hours I could forget the growing discomfort I felt in what was supposed to be my new home. But as the weeks passed, I couldn't ignore the reality that Marcus's resentment was growing, not diminishing. And more concerning, it seemed to be influencing Lizzie as well. As the weeks turned into months, the tension in Lizzie and Marcus's apartment continued to escalate. What had started as subtle comments about extra expenses had evolved into a palpable hostility that permeated the air. I found myself walking on eggshells, hyper-aware of every sound I made and space I occupied. Marcus began creating an unspoken schedule for common areas. He made it clear through his sighs and pointed glances that the living room was his domain after 8 in the evening. If I happened to be watching television when he came home from work, he would stand in the doorway, car keys jangling impatiently in his hand until I got the hint and retreated to my bedroom. The kitchen became another battleground. I had always found joy in cooking, especially preparing meals for others. It was my way of showing love. But Marcus began complaining about every little thing, from the lingering smells of my simmering stews to the way I organized the refrigerator. "Do we really need to keep all these leftovers?" he asked one evening, holding up a container of perfectly good beef stew I had made 2 days prior. "The fridge is packed with your stuff, Myrtle." My stuff, as if the food I prepared for all of us, including him, was somehow an imposition. I swallowed my hurt and quietly began preparing simpler meals that left fewer leftovers, though it meant more daily cooking. Dinner times became increasingly uncomfortable affairs. Marcus would pepper me with questions that seemed designed to highlight my dependence on them. "So, Myrtle, have you thought about what your long-term plan is?" he asked one evening, cutting his chicken with precise movements. "I mean, this arrangement works for now, but surely you want your own place eventually." Before I could respond, Lizzie jumped in. "Marcus, we've discussed this. Mom is welcome to stay as long as she wants." Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course. Just making conversation." But as the weeks passed, Lizzie's defenses of me grew weaker and less frequent. I noticed she started staying at work even later, sometimes not coming home until after Amanda was in bed. When she was home, she seemed distant, often checking her phone or claiming fatigue to avoid conversation. The close relationship we had always shared was fraying, and it broke my heart. Concerned about the cause of these changes, I began paying more attention to overheard conversations. One evening, while bringing laundry from the dryer, I paused outside Marcus's home office when I heard raised voices. "We're falling behind on the Lexington Street property loan," Marcus was saying, his voice tight with stress. "The bank is making noises about foreclosure if we miss another payment." "Can't you renegotiate?" Lizzie asked, sounding exhausted. "Not in this market. The commercial property values in that area have tanked. It was supposed to be my big break, and now it's a millstone around our necks." "We'll figure it out," Lizzie said. "Maybe we can use some of my year-end bonus to catch up." "Your bonus? That's months away, and it's already earmarked for Amanda's school tuition." There was a pause, then Marcus continued, his voice lower. "Having your mother here isn't helping, you know. It's another expense we didn't plan for." "She's family, Marcus. We can't just put a price tag on that." "Maybe not. But every extra person has a cost. Another water user, another electricity user, another food consumer. It adds up." I tiptoed away, my laundry clutched to my chest, heart pounding. So that was it. Marcus's business ventures weren't going well, and I had become a convenient scapegoat for their financial stress. The next day, I gathered my courage and approached Lizzie while Marcus was at work. "Honey, I've been thinking it might be good for me to contribute to the household expenses. I know having another person here increases your costs." Lizzie looked startled. "Mom, that's not necessary. You're family." "I insist," I said firmly. "I have my Social Security and some savings. Let me pay a fair amount for rent and utilities." She hesitated, then named a figure that was quite modest for the area. I immediately offered more, but she refused, saying it was more than enough. I wrote her a check on the spot, covering 3 months in advance. The relief in her eyes was both confirmation I'd done the right thing and a painful reminder of how financial stress was affecting my daughter. When Marcus found out about my contribution, his reaction was unexpected. Rather than being pleased, he seemed almost offended. "We didn't ask you to move in for your money, Myrtle," he said stiffly when Lizzie told him. "I know that," I replied calmly, "but it's only fair that I contribute to a household I'm part of." He mumbled something about it not being necessary, but pocketed the check Lizzie had handed him. I noticed he was slightly more cordial to me the next few days, but it didn't last. Despite the financial contribution, the restrictions on my movements within the apartment continued to increase. Marcus instituted what he called bathroom schedules to optimize morning routines, which effectively meant I could only use my bathroom during designated times. The fact that it was supposedly my private bathroom seemed to have been forgotten. My bedroom at least remained my sanctuary, though even there I began to feel confined. I spent more and more time out of the apartment during the day, visiting libraries, parks, and coffee shops where I could sit without feeling I was in someone's way. Throughout all this, my relationship with Amanda remained a bright spot. She was blissfully unaware of the adult tensions, delighting in our after-school adventures and bedtime stories. I cherished those moments, knowing they might be the only true connection I had left in this household. One evening, after putting Amanda to bed, I decided to look for apartments online. Perhaps it was time to acknowledge that this living arrangement wasn't working. I had money from selling my house, Frank's life insurance, and our investments. There was no financial reason I couldn't get a place of my own. I began researching one-bedroom apartments in the area, something modest but comfortable, preferably close enough to still see Amanda regularly. The prices were steep. Lizzie and Marcus's neighborhood was one of the most expensive in the city, but not beyond my means if I was careful. As I browsed listings, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Leaving would mean admitting that the close relationship I'd always thought I had with my daughter was perhaps more fragile than I'd believed, but staying in a place where I was clearly unwelcome was slowly crushing my spirit. I didn't share my apartment hunting with either Lizzie or Marcus, not wanting to create more tension before I had a concrete plan. But as the atmosphere in the home continued to deteriorate, I became more determined to find my own space. Marcus's irritability increased as the weeks passed. I later learned that another of his real estate ventures had failed, putting even more strain on their finances. He began making snide remarks even in front of Amanda, who was old enough to sense the discord but too young to understand it. "Grandma, why is Daddy always grumpy when you're around?" she asked me one afternoon while we were baking cookies. My heart broke at her innocent question. "Grown-ups sometimes get grumpy when they have a lot on their minds, sweetie. It's not about you or me." But of course, in Marcus's case, it very much was about me, and soon enough the situation would reach a breaking point that would change all of our lives forever. It was a Tuesday evening when everything finally imploded. I had spent the day with Amanda, picking her up from school and helping her with a science project about the solar system. We had crafted planets from styrofoam balls, painted them in bright colors, and hung them from a wire hanger. She was so proud of her work, especially Jupiter with its swirling orange and white stripes. To celebrate the completion of her project, I decided to prepare a special dinner. I made Marcus's favorite pot roast with carrots and potatoes, a dish I knew he had complimented in the past. I thought perhaps a nice meal might ease some of the tension that had been building. The apartment smelled wonderful as the roast slow-cooked throughout the afternoon. Amanda set the table with extra care, even folding paper napkins into triangles the way I had taught her. We were just putting the finishing touches on a homemade apple pie when the front door opened. Marcus stormed in, his tie askew and his expression thunderous. He tossed his briefcase onto the entryway table with such force that a small decorative bowl toppled over, spilling keys and coins onto the floor. "Bad day," I ventured cautiously, wiping my hands on my apron. He glared at me as if just noticing my presence. "You could say that," he snapped. "Lost the Westridge contract. Client went with another broker at the last minute." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "Dinner's almost ready if you're hungry." He glanced at the set table and shook his head. "Not hungry. Need a shower." He stalked off toward the master bedroom, leaving Amanda looking confused and upset. "Is Daddy mad at us?" she whispered. I hugged her close. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes adults have difficult days at work. Let's give him some space to cool down." Lizzie arrived home about 20 minutes later, looking exhausted. She greeted us with a distracted smile, asked Amanda about her day, and then went to find Marcus. I could hear their hushed voices from the bedroom, but couldn't make out the words. When they finally emerged, Marcus had changed into casual clothes, but his mood hadn't improved. He sat heavily at the table while Lizzie helped me bring the food out. The tension in the room was palpable, like a storm cloud hanging over us. I tried to lighten the mood. "Amanda did such a wonderful job on her science project today. Show Daddy and Mommy your solar system, sweetie." Amanda eagerly retrieved her project from the living room and began explaining each planet. Normally, this would have captured Lizzie and Marcus's attention. Their daughter was the center of their world. But tonight, Marcus merely nodded absently, while Lizzie made a visible effort to show enthusiasm despite her fatigue. We began eating in uncomfortable silence. The pot roast, which had smelled so promising, seemed to lose its flavor in the tense atmosphere. I noticed Marcus pushing the food around his plate rather than eating it. "Is something wrong with the roast?" I asked. That simple question somehow became the match that lit the powder keg. Marcus threw down his fork with a clatter. "Yes, actually, it's dry and bland just like every dinner this week, but we're all supposed to smile and pretend it's delicious, right?" "Marcus," Lizzie exclaimed, glancing nervously at Amanda, whose eyes had gone wide. "What?" he shot back. "I've had a day from hell. We're hemorrhaging money, and I'm supposed to be grateful for overcooked meat." "I'm sorry it's not to your liking," I said, stiffly, hurt by his outburst, but trying to maintain my dignity. "Perhaps you prefer to cook tomorrow night." He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "That's rich. You've taken over every inch of this place, rearranged my kitchen, monopolized my wife's time, and now you're suggesting I should cook too." "That's enough." Lizzie intervened, her voice tight. "Amanda, why don't you take your dinner to your room and watch some TV? The grown-ups need to talk." Amanda looked scared, but obeyed, gathering her plate and scurrying off to her bedroom. The sound of her door closing echoed in the sudden silence. "I don't know what's gotten into you," Lizzie said to Marcus once Amanda was out of earshot, "but you're being incredibly rude." "What's gotten into me? Are you serious?" Marcus's voice rose. "We're 3 months behind on the commercial loan, the credit cards are maxed out, and we've got an extra person living here indefinitely. My mother is not the cause of our financial problems." Lizzie retorted. "Your risky investments are—" Marcus's face flushed with anger. "At least I'm trying to better our situation. Meanwhile, you invited your mother to live with us without any discussion of how long she'd stay or how it would work financially." "She's my mother. She just lost my father." Lizzie's voice cracked with emotion. "And I'm sympathetic to that. I really am." Marcus said, his tone softening marginally before hardening again. "But it's been 8 months, Lizzie. 8 months of an extra mouth to feed, extra utilities, extra everything." I sat frozen, each word landing like a physical blow. There it was again. Extra mouth to feed, as if I were nothing but a burden, a problem to be solved. "I've been contributing financially," I said quietly. "And I help with Amanda and the housework." Marcus turned his glare on me. "Your contribution doesn't come close to covering the real cost of having you here. And let's be honest, your help often creates more work. The way you parent Amanda undermines our authority, and your cooking is stuck in the 1980s. "That's not fair," I protested, my voice shaking. "I've tried to be respectful of your parenting decisions, and I cook meals everyone has enjoyed in the past." "Well, I never enjoyed them," Marcus retorted. "I was just being polite. And as for respecting our parenting, that's a joke. You constantly spoil her, and then we have to deal with the fallout." Tears welled in my eyes, but I fought to keep them from falling. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. "I think you're displacing your frustration about work onto my mother," Lizzie said, reaching for my hand across the table. "This isn't about her cooking or how she is with Amanda. This is about your failed deals." That was the wrong thing to say. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "My failed deals are trying to secure our future, but it's pretty hard to focus on that when I'm constantly worried about the extra expenses piling up at home." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I can't do this anymore, Lizzie. I've tried to be patient, but it's been months. Your mother needs to find her own place, now." Lizzie looked stricken. "You can't just kick my mother out." "Watch me," he snarled. "This is my home too, and I get a say in who lives here." I found my voice, then dignity straightening my spine despite the pain in my heart. "It's okay, Lizzie. If Marcus feels this strongly, perhaps it is time for me to find my own place." "See, even she agrees," Marcus said triumphantly. 2 weeks should be plenty of time to find an apartment, right, Myrtle?" 2 weeks, Lizzie gasped. That's not enough time to find something decent in this market. It's fine, I said, though my mind was reeling at the thought of having to find a new home so quickly. I'll manage. No, it's not fine, Lizzie protested, turning to Marcus. This is my mother we're talking about. You can't just throw her out like she's some unwanted roommate. For a moment, I thought Lizzie would continue to defend me. I saw a flash of the strong, compassionate daughter I had raised. But then Marcus stepped closer to her, his voice lowering to a dangerous quiet. It's her or me, Lizzie. I can't live like this anymore. The ultimatum hung in the air between them. I held my breath, watching my daughter's face as she processed his words. I saw the conflict there, the struggle between her love for me and her commitment to her marriage. And then slowly her expression changed, hardened in a way I had never seen before. 2 weeks isn't reasonable, she said, but her tone had shifted. She wasn't arguing against my leaving anymore, just the timeline. A month would be more fair. My heart shattered in that moment. My own daughter, the child I had carried, raised, and loved unconditionally, had chosen her husband's comfort over my well-being. The betrayal was so profound that I felt physically ill. A month then, Marcus agreed, looking satisfied, but not a day more. I stood up, legs shaky but determined not to collapse. If you'll excuse me. I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside. I think I need some air. Neither of them stopped me as I grabbed my purse and jacket and walked out of the apartment. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath as the reality of what had just happened sank in. I had been cast out, deemed an extra mouth to feed, and unwanted in my own daughter's home. I took the elevator down to the lobby, nodded mechanically at the doorman, and walked out into the cool evening air. With no destination in mind, I simply walked, letting the tears finally fall as I put distance between myself and the place I had briefly thought might be my new home. By the time I returned to the apartment hours later, the lights were out except for a small lamp left on in the entryway. A yellow sticky note on the refrigerator in Lizzie's handwriting said only, "We can talk tomorrow. Good night." I crept quietly to my room, not wanting to wake anyone, especially Amanda. Inside, I sat on the edge of the bed, no longer crying, but filled with a strange, calm clarity. This apartment had never been my home, and now I needed to find one of my own. But more than that, I needed to reclaim the dignity and independence that I had somehow lost in the fog of grief after Frank's death. As I prepared for bed, I remembered Frank's words to me in his final days, "Be smart about the money, Myrtle." At the time, I hadn't fully understood what he meant. Now I was beginning to. I lay awake for hours, a plan slowly forming in my mind. If Marcus and Lizzie wanted me gone, I would go, but I would not go quietly into some small, forgettable apartment. No, I would make sure they remembered what they had done, and I knew exactly how to do it. The next morning, I woke early with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Frank passed away. While Lizzie and Marcus were still asleep, I carefully packed an overnight bag with essentials, making as little noise as possible. I wrote a brief note explaining that I would be staying at a hotel while I looked for a permanent place and left it on my neatly made bed. Before leaving, I peeked into Amanda's room. She was sleeping peacefully, her dark hair spread across the pillow and her small hand clutching a stuffed rabbit I had given her. I felt a pang of sadness knowing I wouldn't see her every day anymore. Quietly, I placed a kiss on her forehead and whispered that I loved her, though I knew she couldn't hear me. The doorman looked surprised to see me leaving with a suitcase so early. "Everything okay, Miss Wilson?" he asked, holding the door for me. "Just fine, George," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Taking a little trip." I hailed a taxi and directed the driver to the Grand Hotel downtown, one of the city's most luxurious establishments. If I was going to start my new life, I might as well do it in style, at least temporarily. The room cost more per night than I would normally spend in a week, but Frank's voice in my head reminded me that we had always been too frugal, saving for a retirement we never got to enjoy together. Once settled in my suite, I pulled out my cell phone and made 2 important calls. The first was to Larry Patterson, the lawyer who had handled Frank's estate. He sounded genuinely pleased to hear from me. "Myrtle, it's been too long. How are you holding up?" His warm voice was comforting in its familiarity. "I've been better, Larry," I admitted, and then proceeded to give him a condensed version of what had happened with Lizzie and Marcus. "I'm so sorry," he said when I finished. "Family disputes can be the most painful. What can I do to help?" I need your advice on a few things, I said. First, I want to get a clear picture of my financial situation. Frank always said you were the one who really understood where all our money was. Larry chuckled. Frank was too modest. He had quite a knack for investments, but yes, I'd be happy to go over everything with you. When would you like to come in? We scheduled an appointment for later that afternoon. Then I made my second call to a real estate agent Frank had worked with in the past, a no-nonsense woman named Helen Grant. Helen, it's Myrtle Wilson, Frank's wife, I added, unsure if she would remember me from the few times we had met. Of course, Myrtle, she exclaimed. I was so sorry to hear about Frank's passing. He was a wonderful man. After exchanging pleasantries, I got to the point. I'm looking to buy a property, Helen. Something I can move into relatively quickly. Certainly, she replied. What area are you considering, and do you have a specific type of home in mind? Single-family condo townhouse? I hesitated, then decided to be direct. Actually, I'm interested in an entire building. There was a pause on the line. An entire building, like a multi-unit residential property. Exactly, and I have a specific one in mind. The Westwood Heights building on Magnolia Street. Another longer pause. That's a luxury high-rise, Myrtle. It would be an extremely expensive acquisition, assuming it's even for sale. I have reason to believe the owner might be interested in selling, I said, thinking of a conversation I had overheard between Marcus and one of his real estate buddies complaining about the building's management company wanting to offload some properties. Could you look into it for me discreetly? Helen's professional demeanor quickly reasserted itself. Of course. I'll make some inquiries and get back to you. But Myrtle, she added gently, a building of that caliber would likely be priced in the tens of millions. I understand, I said calmly. Please just find out if it's available and at what price. I'll wait for your call. After hanging up, I ordered room service breakfast and pulled out a notepad from the hotel desk. I began to make a list of things I needed to do, priorities for the coming days and weeks. Finding a permanent place to live was obviously at the top, but there were other matters to attend to as well. At 2 o'clock, I took a taxi to Larry's office in the financial district. His secretary immediately ushered me into his corner office with its impressive view of the city skyline. Larry, a kind-faced man in his 60s who had been Frank's friend as well as his lawyer, greeted me with a warm hug. You're looking well, Myrtle, he said, gesturing for me to take a seat in one of the comfortable leather chairs facing his desk. Thank you, Larry. I'm trying to keep it together. He nodded sympathetically. So, you want to review your financial situation. Any particular reason for the sudden interest? I told him about my need to find a new place to live and my idea about the Westwood Heights building. His eyebrows rose higher and higher as I spoke. That's certainly an ambitious plan, he said when I finished. But before we get into the feasibility, let me give you a comprehensive overview of your assets. What followed was a detailed explanation of just how shrewd Frank had been with our money over the decades. Besides his company pension and our retirement accounts, he had consistently invested in a diverse portfolio of stocks, bonds, and real estate. The commercial property I knew about was actually just one of several investments. Additionally, his life insurance policy was substantially larger than I had realized. So, what's the bottom line, Larry? I asked after trying to absorb all this information. How much do I actually have to work with? He named a figure that made me gasp. It was several times what I had thought enough to live very comfortably for the rest of my life, even if I never earned another penny. Frank wanted to make absolutely sure you were taken care of, Larry explained gently. He was quite conservative in what he told you about your finances because he didn't want you to feel overwhelmed while you were grieving. But he left detailed instructions for me to fully explain everything when you were ready. I sat in stunned silence, tears welling in my eyes. Even from beyond the grave, Frank was still taking care of me, still watching out for my well-being. Now about this building idea, Larry continued after giving me a moment to compose myself. It's unusual, certainly, but not impossible. However, I'd need to know more about the property and the asking price before I could advise you properly. As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Helen. Myrtle, I've made some inquiries about Westwood Heights, she said without preamble. You're in luck. The current owner is indeed looking to sell, though it hasn't been officially listed yet. They're asking $48 million. I glanced at Larry, who could obviously hear Helen's voice. His expression remained neutral professional. I see, I said. And what would be the process if I wanted to make an offer? Helen outlined the steps involved, including securing financing, conducting due diligence, and negotiating terms. It's a complex transaction, Myrtle, not something to rush into. I understand. Could you send me some preliminary information about the building current occupancy, rental income expenses, that sort of thing? Of course. I'll email you what I can gather. But Myrtle, she added, her voice concerned, I feel I should ask if you're absolutely sure about this. It's a massive investment and commitment. I appreciate your concern, Helen. Let's just say I have my reasons. I'll wait for your email. After ending the call, I looked at Larry, who was watching me with a thoughtful expression. 48 million, I said. Is it possible? He steepled his fingers. With your assets, yes, potentially. But it would mean liquidating a significant portion of your investments, which would have tax implications. And managing a property of that isn't like owning a single rental unit. It's essentially running a business. I wouldn't have to manage it myself, would I? Isn't there a management company that handles day-to-day operations? Yes, typically. But you'd still be the owner, ultimately responsible for major decisions and liabilities. I nodded, considering this. What if I created some kind of company to buy and own the building for liability protection? Larry's eyes widened slightly. That's actually quite astute, Myrtle. A limited liability company would be appropriate for this kind of acquisition. Frank taught you well. He did, I agreed softly, more than I realized at the time. We spent the next hour discussing the mechanics of creating an LLC, the process of transferring assets, and the potential risks and benefits of such a large investment. By the time I left Larry's office, I had a much clearer picture of what I was getting myself into and a renewed determination to proceed. That evening, back in my hotel suite, I reviewed the information Helen had sent about Westwood Heights. The building was 90% occupied with a steady rental income and reasonable expenses. Most units were leased, but a few were owner-occupied, including the penthouse. The current owner was a real estate investment group that was divesting some of its holdings to focus on commercial properties. Included in Helen's email was a breakdown of current tenants by unit number. I scrolled through it until I found what I was looking for, Unit 1203, leased to Marcus and Elizabeth Duncan. According to the lease terms, they were paying $3,500 per month, locked in for another 14 months. I sat back, a plan crystallizing in my mind. If I owned the building, I would effectively be Lizzie and Marcus's landlord. The thought gave me a grim satisfaction. After being made to feel like an unwelcome guest, a burden, an extra mouth to feed, I would have the power to determine where they lived and how much they paid. It was petty, perhaps even vengeful, but after the humiliation I had endured, it felt like poetic justice. And if Marcus thought $3,500 a month was straining their budget, he had no idea what was coming. I picked up my phone and called Helen back. I'd like to make an offer on Westwood Heights, I said without preamble. But there are a few conditions I want to include. I'm listening, Helen replied, her tone carefully neutral. First, I want my identity as the buyer kept strictly confidential. The purchase should be made through the LLC I'm setting up. Second, I want to close as quickly as possible. And third, I want the right to review and potentially modify all existing leases once the sale is completed. Those are unusual conditions, but not impossible, Helen said slowly. May I ask why the secrecy? I hesitated, then decided she needed to know at least part of the truth. My daughter and son-in-law live in the building. We've had a falling out, and I'd prefer they not know I'm the new owner. At least not immediately. I see, she said, and I could hear the curiosity in her voice, though she was too professional to pry further. I'll do my best to keep your identity confidential, though. I should warn you that in real estate transactions of this magnitude, complete anonymity is difficult to maintain. I understand. Do what you can. We discussed a few more details before ending the call. After hanging up, I stared out the window at the city lights, thinking about what I was setting in motion. Part of me wondered if I was going too far, if my hurt and anger were clouding my judgment. But then I remembered Marcus's cruel words, the dismissive way he had spoken about me, and the look on Lizzie's face when she chose him over me. My resolve hardened. Frank had always told me I was too nice, too willing to put others' needs before my own. Stand up for yourself sometimes, Myrtle, he would say with a gentle smile. The world won't end if you put yourself first occasionally. Well, I was putting myself first now. And while the world might not end, Marcus and Lizzie's comfortable existence certainly would change dramatically. The thought gave me a satisfaction I hadn't expected to feel. The next morning, I began looking for a more permanent place to live. If all went according to plan with Westwood Heights, I would need somewhere to settle while the purchase was being finalized. I spent the day viewing condos in upscale neighborhoods, eventually finding a charming two-bedroom unit in a boutique building about 15 minutes from Westwood Heights. I made an offer on the spot and by evening had a signed purchase agreement. Everything was falling into place. Now I just had to wait for Helen to work her magic with the Westwood Heights purchase and for Larry to finalize the LLC formation. And then, after years of being the accommodating mother, the supportive wife, the helpful grandmother, I would finally become something entirely different, a landlord with a score to settle. The next few weeks passed in a flurry of activity. I moved into my new condo while the various legal and financial processes for the Westwood Heights purchase proceeded behind the scenes. Larry helped me establish Myrtle's Investments LLC, and Helen worked tirelessly to negotiate the purchase price down to $45 million, still an astronomical sum, but more reasonable given the building's condition and rental income potential. Meanwhile, I received occasional text messages from Lizzie asking where I was staying and if I needed help finding a place. Her messages were polite but distant, as if she were checking a box on her list of daughterly duties, rather than genuinely concerned about my well-being. I responded with equally polite but vague reassurances that I was fine and had found temporary accommodations. Marcus didn't contact me at all, which wasn't surprising. What did surprise me was that he apparently didn't think to check whether I was still using the credit card he had added me to for emergency purchases when I first moved in with them. I was, and that's how I knew they had taken Amanda on a weekend getaway to a resort, charged a rather expensive dinner at a steakhouse, and bought new patio furniture, all while supposedly struggling financially. I mentioned this to Larry during one of our meetings to review the purchase documents for Westwood Heights. If they're so strapped for cash, they have an odd way of showing it. I remarked, showing him the credit card statement on my phone. Larry frowned. That does seem inconsistent with what you've told me about their financial concerns. Have you considered that perhaps Marcus exaggerated their money troubles to justify asking you to leave? I hadn't thought of that, but it made a terrible kind of sense. So he might have used finances as an excuse when the real issue was simply that he didn't want me there. It's possible, Larry said gently. People often find it easier to blame external factors like money rather than admit to personal feelings like wanting more privacy or independence. The idea stung, but it also strengthened my resolve. If Marcus had lied about their financial situation just to get rid of me, then my plan to triple their rent seemed even more fitting. Finally, after what felt like endless paperwork inspections and negotiations, the day arrived when Westwood Heights officially became mine, or technically the property of Myrtle's Investments LLC. Helen called with the news late one Friday afternoon. "Congratulations, Myrtle," she said. "You are now the owner of one of the most prestigious residential buildings in the city." A sense of satisfaction spread through me, warm and vindicating. "Thank you, Helen, for everything. Now about those lease modifications we discussed." "Yes, the management company is prepared to send out notices according to your specifications. They'll go out Monday morning. Are you sure about this, Myrtle? It's a significant increase." "I'm sure," I said firmly. "The market analysis you provided shows that comparable units in the area are renting for much more than what most of the Westwood tenants are paying. I'm simply bringing the rates in line with the market." This was true to an extent. Rental prices in the area had indeed increased substantially since many of the current leases were signed. But the 300% increase I was imposing on Unit 1203 specifically was well beyond market adjustment. It was, I could admit to myself, if not to Helen, purely punitive. "Very well," Helen sighed. "The notices will go out Monday. The management company has also scheduled a meeting with the building staff on Tuesday morning to inform them of the change in ownership. Will you be attending?" "Absolutely," I replied. "I want to introduce myself and make sure they understand my vision for the property." The weekend passed slowly as I anticipated the chaos my actions would soon cause. I felt a mixture of emotions: guilt at what would likely be hardship for innocent tenants, caught in my revenge plan, satisfaction at the thought of Marcus and Lizzie's reaction, and a strange sense of empowerment I hadn't experienced before. For perhaps the first time in my life, I wasn't considering everyone else's needs before my own. It was liberating, if somewhat uncomfortable. Monday morning arrived, and with it the knowledge that notices of rent increases were being delivered to all the residents of Westwood Heights. I imagined the dismayed expressions, the frantic calculations, the hurried consultations with lease agreements to see what recourse tenants might have. And I pictured Marcus coming home from work to find the notice, his face reddening with anger and disbelief, as he realized his comfortable lifestyle was about to become significantly less comfortable. On Tuesday, I dressed with particular care for the meeting with the building staff. I chose a navy blue suit that projected authority without ostentation, pearl earrings that had been a gift from Frank on our 30th anniversary, and low-heeled pumps that were professional but comfortable. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in charge of a multi-million-dollar property, not a grandmother who had been dismissed as an extra mouth to feed. The management company had arranged for the meeting to take place in a small conference room off the main lobby. As I approached the building, I felt a flutter of nerves. This was the first time I had returned to Westwood Heights since the night I had packed my overnight bag and left. The possibility of running into Lizzie, or worse, Marcus, was real, though unlikely given the early hour. The building manager, a competent-looking woman in her 50s named Patricia Reynolds, greeted me at the entrance. "Miss Wilson, I'm Patricia Reynolds, the property manager. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Likewise," I said, shaking her hand firmly, "and thank you for arranging this meeting on such short notice." "Of course, the staff is eager to meet the new owner. I should warn you, though, there's been quite a reaction to the rent increase notices." "I expected as much," I replied calmly. "I'm prepared to discuss individual cases if necessary, but the overall direction is non-negotiable. The building has been undervalued for too long." Patricia nodded professionally, though I detected a hint of concern in her eyes. "Understood. Shall we go in?" The meeting went smoothly for the most part. I introduced myself to the maintenance staff, security personnel, and administrative team, outlining my expectations and assuring them that their jobs were secure under the new ownership. I emphasized my commitment to maintaining the building's luxury status while making necessary upgrades and improvements. Just as we were wrapping up, Patricia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and grimaced slightly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson, but it seems we have a situation. One of the tenants is in the lobby, quite upset about the rent increase and insisting on speaking with the building owner immediately." A thrill of anticipation ran through me. "Did the tenant give a name?" "Yes, a Mr. Duncan from Unit 1203. He's quite agitated." Marcus. It had taken less than 24 hours for him to come storming in, demanding to speak with the new owner. "Perfect. I'll speak with him," I said, rising from my chair. "Is there a private office we can use?" Patricia looked surprised. "You don't normally have to deal with tenant complaints directly, Mrs. Wilson. That's what the management company is for." "I understand, but in this case, I think a personal touch is warranted. Mr. Duncan and I have some history." Her eyebrows rose slightly, but she simply nodded. "We can use my office. It's just down the hall." I followed Patricia to a well-appointed office with a desk and several chairs. Through the glass door, I could see into the lobby where Marcus was pacing his normally well-coiffed hair, disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. He was clutching what I assumed was the rent increase notice, waving it occasionally as he spoke animatedly to the receptionist. "Send him in," I instructed Patricia, taking a seat behind her desk. "And perhaps give us some privacy." She nodded, closing the door behind her as she went to fetch Marcus. I took a deep breath, composing myself for what promised to be a confrontation for the ages. After months of being made to feel small and unwanted in Marcus and Lizzie's home, I was now in the position of power. The irony was delicious. The door burst open and Marcus stormed in, his face flushed with anger. "I demand to speak with the new owner about this outrageous rent increase." He began waving this notice. Then he stopped abruptly, his eyes widening as he recognized me sitting calmly behind the desk. "Myrtle, what are you... Why are you... Where is the new owner?" "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the racing of my heart. "You're looking at her." He stared at me, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" "I'm the new owner of Westwood Heights, or rather my company is, Myrtle's Investments LLC. It's all very official and legal, I assure you. His face went from red to pale in an instant. That's not possible. This building is worth millions. 45 million, to be exact, I confirmed. Frank was very good with investments, as it turns out. Much better than you, it would seem, given your financial concerns about feeding an extra mouth. Marcus sank into a chair, the notice still clutched in his hand. You bought our building. Why? How? The how is straightforward, though I won't bore you with the details of real estate finance. As for why, well, let's just say I decided to invest in property with good long-term potential, and to remind certain people that appearances can be deceiving. The door opened again, and Lizzie rushed in, her face anxious. Marcus, what's going on? I got your text and came right over. Mom. She stopped dead, looking between Marcus and me in confusion. Hello, Lizzie, I said, maintaining my composure. I was just explaining to Marcus that I'm the new owner of this building. But that's not possible, she stammered, echoing her husband. And yet here we are, I replied. I've decided to bring the rental rates more in line with the current market. For most tenants, that means a modest increase. For Unit 1203, however, I felt a more substantial adjustment was warranted. 300% seems fair, don't you think? 300%? Lizzie gasped, snatching the notice from Marcus to read it herself. $10,500 a month. That's insane. We can't afford that. That's rather the point, dear, I said, allowing a hint of steel to enter my voice. It's not pleasant being forced out of your home, is it? Being told you're an unwanted expense, a burden, an extra mouth to feed. Understanding dawned on both their faces. Marcus recovered first, his expression shifting from shock to calculation. Myrtle, surely we can work something out. We're family, after all. Family, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. That's an interesting choice of words from someone who gave his mother-in-law 2 weeks to find a new place to live after her husband died. That was a misunderstanding, Marcus said, attempting a conciliatory smile that looked more like a grimace. We were under a lot of stress. I said things I didn't mean. Did you? I asked quietly. Because they seemed very sincere at the time, particularly the part about me being an unwelcome extra expense. Lizzie stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Mom, please. I know what we did was wrong. I should have stood up for you. But this is our home. Amanda's home. You wouldn't really make us leave, would you? Her mention of Amanda gave me pause. My granddaughter was innocent in all this, and the thought of disrupting her life tugged at my heart. But I reminded myself that children are resilient, and this lesson in consequences might ultimately be valuable for her as well. You have choices, Lizzie, I said, keeping my voice level. You can pay the new rate, which we both know you can't afford. You can move out within 30 days as stipulated in the notice. Or you can do what I did, find temporary accommodations while you figure out your next steps. This is ridiculous, Marcus sputtered, finding his voice again. You can't just triple our rent out of spite. Actually, I can. I corrected him. I checked with my lawyer. As the new owner, I have the right to adjust rental rates when leases come up for renewal. Your lease, coincidentally, is due for renewal next month. We'll fight this, he threatened. We'll sue. On what grounds? I asked calmly. That your mother-in-law, whom you kicked out for being an extra mouth to feed, turned out to be wealthier than you thought, and is now exercising her legal right as a property owner. Good luck with that. Lizzie sank into the chair next to Marcus, her face pale. Mom, please, we made a mistake. We were wrong to ask you to leave, especially the way we did. But this isn't you. You've never been vindictive. Perhaps I've changed, I replied. Or perhaps I've simply learned to value myself more. Either way, the notice stands. $10,500 per month or 30 days to vacate. Your choice. Marcus stood abruptly. This conversation is over. Come on, Lizzie, we're going to call a lawyer. Lizzie hesitated, looking at me with pleading eyes. Mom, I think we're done here, I said firmly. I have other matters to attend to. The management company will be AVA.